Welcome back to the channel, folks. If you're into cutting-edge World War II aviation that looks like it came from a sci-fi movie, today we're going all in on one of the craziest planes ever built, the Messerschmitt Me 163 Komet, the world's first operational rocket-powered fighter that screamed across the sky at over 700 miles per hour, making it literally untouchable by anything the Allies had. This tiny tailless interceptor was basically a manned missile, liquid-fueled rocket engine, no propeller, took off on a drop-away wheeled dolly, climbed like a homesick angel, attacked in a blazing dive, then glided back to land on a belly skid. It terrified bomber crews, killed a bunch of its own pilots, and still holds speed records today, but it was so dangerous and rushed that it never lived up to the hype. We're doing a full 30-minute deep dive here, covering everything from the desperate need that birthed it, the wild design process, the volatile tech that made it fly, the heart-pounding test flights, real combat action, and why this futuristic wonder ultimately failed to change the war. Let's start right at the beginning with the problem the Luftwaffe was facing. By 1941, the skies over Germany were turning into a nightmare for the Nazis. The RAF had started heavy night bombing, and then the Americans joined in with daylight raids using massive formations of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, escorted by long-range fighters like the P-51 Mustang. Conventional German fighters, Bf-109s, Fw-190s, were great dogfighters, but they couldn't climb fast enough to reach the bombers at 30,000 feet before the formations passed over their targets and headed home. The Luftwaffe needed something that could scramble quickly, rockets straight up to altitude, blast the bombers in a high-speed pass, and get out before escorts could catch them. Enter Alexander Lippisch, a brilliant glider designer who'd been obsessed with tailless aircraft and delta wings since the 1920s. He'd already worked on rocket-powered gliders like the DFS-40 and DFS-194, proving you could control a wing-only design at high speeds. In 1939, the Reich Air Ministry gave him funding to develop a rocket interceptor, and by 1941, the DFS-194 made its first powered flights using a Walter HWK RII-203 engine. The results were promising enough that Messerschmitt took over the project, redesignated it the Me 163, and started turning it into a weapon. The first prototype, the Me 163 V1, flew unpowered as a glider in spring 1941, towed behind a Bf-110 mother plane to test handling. Pilots loved the smooth flight, but noted it was tricky at low speeds. The swept wings stalled suddenly without warning. By summer, they installed the cold-thrust Walter for short hops, and in October 1941, test pilot Heini Dittmar hit 624 miles per hour in a shallow dive, the fastest any human had gone in level flight at that point. Everyone was excited, but the hot fuel version, the hypergolic T-Stoff and C-Stoff mix that ignited on contact, was way more powerful and way more dangerous. Early tests saw engines exploding on the ground, fuel tanks dissolving from leaks, and pilots getting chemical burns. Still, the potential was huge. Climb rate over 16,000 feet per minute, top speed pushing 700 miles per hour, and a size so small it was hard to spot. Hitler got briefed on the project and loved it as part of his Wunderwaffen obsession, ordering accelerated development. Production versions, the Me 163B, started rolling out in 1943 with wooden wings, a bubble canopy, and armament of two 20mm cannons, later upgraded to 30mm Mk108s that could tear a bomber apart with a short burst. The operational plan was point defense. Hide the planes near factories or cities, scramble when bombers approached, rocket up through the formation, fire, then glide home. Training schools were set up, but the learning curve was brutal. Many experienced pilots died just mastering takeoff and landing. We're only getting started on the tech details and the first combat units, so if this is already grabbing you, hit that like button, subscribe for more wild WW2 aviation deep dives, and let's roll right into part 2 where we break down the engine, the flight profile, and the insane risks pilots faced every single mission. Okay, part 2. Let's get technical, because the Me-163 Komet was packed with revolutionary and downright terrifying engineering that made it fly like nothing else. The airframe was super lightweight at just over 4,000 pounds empty, mostly plywood skin over an aluminum frame with those sharply swept 23-degree wings and no horizontal tail, just wingtip rudders for yaw control. The delta-like shape gave excellent high-speed stability, but poor low-speed lift, which is why takeoffs and landings were so sketchy. Power came from the Walter HWK-109-509A bipropellant rocket motor mounted in the rear fuselage. 2 tanks, one for T-STOF, 80% hydrogen peroxide plus stabilizer, and one for C-STOF, hydrazine hydrate and methanol, pumped into the combustion chamber where they spontaneously ignited, producing a roaring blue flame and up to 3,750 pounds of variable thrust. You had a throttle for fine control, full power for climb and attack, lower settings to cruise and save fuel. Total burn time was around 7 to 8 minutes on a full load, maybe 12 if you nursed it, so every second counted. Takeoff procedure was unique and dramatic. You sat on a jettisonable 2-wheel dolly, ignited the engine, accelerated to about 140 miles per hour down a short runway. The dolly dropped away automatically, and you rocketed skyward at a 45 to 60-degree angle, pulling insane Gs. Once at altitude, you'd level off, spot the bomber stream, dive to build even more speed, fire your cannons in a split-second pass, then use the leftover momentum to zoom back up or glide toward home. Landing was pure skill. Approach at over 130 miles per hour, flare gently, drop the retractable belly skid, and pray you didn't bounce or veer off into the grass where residual fuel could ignite and turn the plane into a fireball. The cockpit was tiny but advanced for the time. Pressurized, heated, with a clear bubble canopy and armored glass, basic Revi gun sight, and later versions got a simple autopilot to help during glide. Armament evolved. Early models had two 20mm MG-151/20 with 100 rounds per gun, but the real killer was the upgrade to two 30mm Mk-108 cannons with 60 rounds each, low velocity but massive explosive shells that could blow a wing off a B-17 with 3 or 4 hits. Some experimental versions tested upward-firing Schrage music jazz music batteries or even rocket pods for extra punch. But the fuel, man, the fuel was the Achilles heel. T-STOF and C-STOF were hypergolic, meaning no igniter needed, but they were also highly corrosive and explosive. A leak in flight could eat through fuel lines or dissolve the pilot's rubber suit, causing horrific chemical burns. After landing, any leftover propellant in the turbines often caused spontaneous explosions, earning the Komet nicknames like Devil's Egg or Powered Bomb. Test pilots at Peenemünde and Bad Zwischen racked up fatalities. One famous incident saw ace Hanna Reich barely survive a crash when residual fuel ignited. Despite the risks, speeds kept climbing. In 1944, Dittmar hit an unofficial 702 miles per hour in a dive, and post-war Allied tests confirmed it could touch Mach 0.84. The Luftwaffe formed Airprobungskommando 16 in 1943 for operational trials, led by Wolfgang Spate, a veteran with over 90 kills. They worked out tactics: launch in pairs or schwarm, climb above the bombers, attack from astern, or head-on in a shallow dive to maximize closing speed. By mid-1944, the first full squadron, 1.JG-400, was ready near Leipzig, with camouflage dispersal sites to avoid strafing. The Allies knew something was coming. Intelligence reports mentioned a rocket midget, but no one was prepared for how fast it was. The main unit, Jagdgeschwader 400 under Major Wolfgang Spate, became operational in May 1944 at Brandis Airfield near Leipzig, with satellite fields to spread out and avoid Allied attacks. Planes were kept in wooded hangars, towed out by trucks for quick launches when radar spotted incoming bombers. The first real intercept came on July 28, 1944, when Lieutenant Hartmut Rill scrambled against a high-flying RAF Mosquito recon plane. He closed at insane speed, but couldn't get a shot before the Mosquito dove away. Early missions were mostly training chases against Allied fighters testing German defenses. The Komet's first confirmed kill happened on August 16th, when Feldwebel Siegfried Schubert attacked a formation of B-17s. He dove through the box, fired his 30mm cannons, and claimed one fortress damaged before zooming out of range. A week later, on August 24th, Schubert scored big again, downing 2 B-17s in a single blazing pass, proving the tactic worked when everything went right. Other pilots racked up successes. Lieutenant Fritz Kelb claimed a B-17, and there were several more damaged bombers that limped home with huge holes from Mk-108 shells. The psychological impact was real. Allied bomber crews reported seeing tiny streaks flashing past at impossible speeds, and gunners had almost no time to track them. Closing rates over 500 miles per hour meant a Komet could appear, fire, and vanish in seconds. Official Luftwaffe records credit the Me-163 with around 9 confirmed victories, mostly heavy bombers, and perhaps double that in probables or damaged, across roughly 300 sorties from mid-1944 to spring 1945. But the other side of the ledger was grim. For every bomber downed, the Komet program lost pilots to accidents at an alarming rate. Takeoff explosions from dolly failures, mid-air engine fires, fuel leaks dissolving tanks in flight, and landing crashes where the skid dug in and flipped the plane. Residual propellant often ignited on impact, turning survivors into burn victims. One of the worst was in September 1944, when ace pilot Oberleutnant Herbert Strzelnicki died after a rough landing caused an explosion. Another incident saw a pilot dissolve alive when T-Stoff leaked into the cockpit. Allied fighters adapted quickly. P-51 Mustangs and Hawker Tempests started patrolling near suspected Komet bases, waiting for the powerless gliders to come home low and slow. Several Komets were shot down during vulnerable landing approaches, including one famous case where a Tempest pilot caught a Komet and claimed it burst into flames from its own fuel. By late 1944, material shortages and bombing disrupted fuel production, grounding most units for weeks. Improved variants, like the Me-163C with a stretched fuselage and auxiliary cruise rocket for longer endurance, reached prototypes. In the Me-163D, later Ju-248, with better aerodynamics, was in testing, but none saw real combat before the war ended. JG-400 disbanded in April 1945 as Allies overran their fields. When American and British troops captured Brandis and other sites in spring 1945, they found dozens of Komets in various states, some intact, some half-built, and a few wrecked from accidents. The Allies shipped examples back for testing. The U.S. evaluated one at Wright Field in Ohio, painting it in American markings and flying it with safer fuel substitutes, while the British tested theirs at Farnborough. The Soviets grabbed blueprints and examples too. Post-war analysis confirmed the Komet's strengths: blistering acceleration, unmatched climb rate, and high-speed handling, but hammered the weaknesses: tiny endurance, deadly fuel, no range for escort missions, and vulnerability during takeoff and landing. Total production was around 370 airframes, but only about 100 to 120 reached operational units, with maybe 30 to 40 pilots qualified at peak. The kill-to-loss ratio was poor, roughly 1 bomber per 4 or 5 Komets lost, mostly to non-combat causes. Pilots who mastered it, like Schubert with multiple victories, became legends, but many more died training or on routine flights. The Komet influenced future designs. Swept-wing research helped the MiG-15 and F-86 in Korea, rocket propulsion fed into missiles and early space programs, and mixed power concepts, rocket plus jet, appeared in planes like the Saunders-Roe SR-53 and even the Space Shuttle's early ideas. Hanna Reich, the famous test pilot who flew the Komet multiple times, survived the war and later worked on gliders again. Today, restored Komets are museum treasures. You can see originals at the Deutsches Museum in Munich, the RAF Museum in Cosford, the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, and the Australian War Memorial has a flyable reproduction powered by modern engines. The official speed record of 702 miles per hour stood until broken by faster jets post-war, and the Komet remains the fastest propellerless aircraft until the sound barrier fell in 1947. In the end, the Mess-163 was a victim of its time, born from desperation when Germany needed miracles, rushed into service before it was safe, and overwhelmed by Allied air superiority and logistics collapse. It proved rocket fighters could work in theory, but were impractical in real war. Jets like the Mess-262 offered better endurance and reliability without the suicide risk. The Komet symbolizes Nazi Germany's late war gamble on Wunderwaffens, brilliant engineering, terrifying potential, but ultimately too little, too late, and too dangerous. That's the full rocket ride. If this story fired you up, smash that like button, comment below if you'd ever strap into something this wild, subscribe for more deep WWII aviation and secret projects, hit the bell for notifications, and share with your history-loving friends. Thanks for sticking through the whole thing, stay awesome, and I'll catch you in the next one.